Missouri in March of 1925. He and his mother didn't agree on the exact date of his birth, and his passport and his birth certificate and driver's license all had different dates. At age 6, his mother sent him down to light the coal furnace, and since he was a curious child with an independent spirit, he proceeded to play with the matches during the process of lighting the furnace. He then caught on fire and nearly died. He was rushed to the hospital where he stayed for the next 2 years, recovering from the burns and having multiple surgeries to graft his skin. He got all his medical care for free at Shriners Hospital because his dad was a member of the local Shriners Mason group. He had a social awareness at that young age, wondering what would have happened to me if my dad wasn't a Shriner. He went along in his young life after recovering from his burns, continuing a habit of having near-death experiences in his youth. Once he was fishing out marbles from the train trestle, he was squirming to get through the train tracks when the train came. Fortunately, he was able to get back under the tracks in time as the train passed above him. Another thing he liked to do was ride the streetcar, hang his foot off, and let it drag on the rail. Until one day his foot got stuck. Fortunately, all he lost was his shoe. His mother once told me, "He was so smart, but he just about drove me insane." The next big life event for him was World War II. At age 16, he tried to enlist in the Army, but they wouldn't take him because of his burn scars. So he signed up for the Merchant Marines. There he traveled the world, seeing Iran and Europe and other places. He saw desperate poverty for the first time. There he also learned about unions. The ships had round-the-clock shifts, and the way his shifts worked out made breakfast his main meal. They only gave 2 biscuits and wouldn't give seconds. He was always hungry. So one day he went to a union meeting. They had an agenda item called Good and Welfare, where they opened the floor of the meeting to air the crew's concerns. He was shy to speak up, but he thought he would give it a try to see if he could get seconds at breakfast. He expressed how he grew up in a working-class home, but while you had to be modest with portions of expensive dishes like meat, you could always have seconds on things like biscuits. The ship steward then stood up and explained how they had run out of food on a previous trip, so he was now rationing. The members took a vote and decided to let people have seconds and just try to get more supplies along the way. Tom was impressed with the union. The next morning he went to breakfast and he was given 3 biscuits on his plate. He wasn't hungry after he ate, but he wanted to test out to see if he could really get seconds. So he went back to ask for seconds, and the chief steward came out with a huge tub of biscuits, as well as another tub full of a single huge biscuit. And he was convinced at that time that the union was a powerful institution. After the war, he came back to St. Louis. In his 20s, he met Gloria, his first partner. She had 6 kids when he met her. In St. Louis, they worked on issues of racial equality. One day, they heard a senator refer to the 47 states and the Soviet of Washington. So they decided that was a good place to go see. Soon after moving to Seattle, they moved into the house on 2nd Northeast by Northgate, and their sons Tom Jr. and Jonathan were born. With all those kids to feed, he realized he needed to get a good job and get a trade. He had a job at the time at Gasworks, not the park version, shoveling byproducts of tar manufacturing. He hated that job. So he started studying at the library after work how to do plumbing. And somehow, without doing an apprenticeship, he managed to take the journeyman's exam and become a journeyman plumber. For the next decade, they worked on issues of racial justice, including supporting the boycott of Far West Taxi because they would not hire black drivers, among other issues around racism and civil rights. Then they parted ways. In the 60s, he met Leslie Cooper at a Fair Play for Cuba committee meeting, and with her had his 3rd and 4th children, Bill and me. My childhood memories were filled with hippies, marches, a little tear gas, and free daycares. He raised us as a single dad, and somehow, in all that chaos of the Vietnam War protest movement, I always felt cared for and safe. In the Northgate area in the early 70s, it was still like Leave It to Beaver, and our house looked like a little Woodstock commune dropped in the middle. Despite the fact that his house was not in the city limits when he moved in, the city was not ready to accept Tom and his eccentric ways when the city limits moved north to include Tom's house. This resulted in citations against our pet goat and lawnmower named Flopsy for being a farm animal, citations for too many cars, citations for the lawn being too long. Once there was a citation about a pile of scrap wood that he used to burn to heat the house. The citation said we had illegal storage of building materials. Tom went to the hearing and maintained it was a sculpture. Eventually, the city fined him for not having the city up to code. This led to the battle he and Judy had with the city, where he organized with other homeowners that were facing similar citations. In the end, he and Judy, working with other homeowners, were able to change the housing code that allowed it to be loosened for owner-occupied homes. He met Judy just before that time in 1975 at a Unitarian Church singles group swimming party. Neither of them swam. He had a pin on his lapel supporting schools, so Judy struck up a conversation with him. She had heard about him before, but they had never met. She knew he hung out with the unruly radicals at the Blue Moon Tavern. But they went on a date, and the rest was history. The next phase was in the 80s, the big remodel. While the city had no business telling Tom how to keep up his house, he and Judy concluded it could use some work. That led to the solar house remodel and continuous transformation. In the 90s, he was organizing against the first Gulf War. I remember being in his living room watching CNN broadcast the first bombs falling on Iraq. He immediately picked up the phone, starting to organize the first protest of the war, which led to the formation of the Northwest Coalition Against Military Intervention in the Middle East. So it was called NWCAMI for short. He also was involved in supported Palestinian rights during that time. In the last 20 years, he was primarily involved in Cuba solidarity work. The last 3 years of his life were much more limited physically, but that didn't stop him from being a central player in Cuba work or, much to Judy's dismay, continuing to transform the house with the help of his handyman, Jeff. He also knew how to enjoy himself. For the last several years, he and Judy took annual month-long vacations to Mexico, as well as other travel adventures. In August, the final blow to his already failing health was the diagnosis of incurable esophageal cancer. As always, it was funny before. Anyway, as always, Tom did not give up and lay down. His final endeavor of activism was by refining his will. He knew his kids and his wife were financially stable, so he decided to put his savings that he had amassed over the years into a trust called the Workers' Defense Fund. The last month of his life, where he was very aware of his coming death. He had been fighting death and winning despite his body's deterioration. The cancer diagnosis gave him the chance to stop fighting and focus on taking time to say goodbye. He had lots of visitors, a couple of parties, and the most recent of which was just a week before he died. At 97 pounds, he was still able to shout across the room full of people to get Judy's attention. It was so hard to believe he could really be terminally ill. After seeing all his kids and grandkids, having the final draft of his trust reviewed with the trustees, he finally let go and died in bed with Judy lying by his side. We are grateful it was peaceful.